I should be fine, thanks. All right. Good morning, colleagues. Program director, through you, all protocol observed. Just to emphasize, my name again is Clive Selwadi, formerly with the Department of Public Enterprises. And we are now under the authority of the Minister of Planning, Monitoring, and Evaluation. And as you would know, the President issued a proclamation sometime last year indicating that us as a department are shutting down operations. So I'm in my last few weeks as Chief Director in the department. We are going to be moving to other departments. So some of you here may be my colleagues in future. At least I know that I'm going to the Department of Transport, of course, playing a similar role. So the only thing that changes is that I won't be overseeing 6 state-owned companies. We were responsible for Transnet, Eskom, Alesco, SAA, DNL, and which one am I forgetting next? I'll remember. But then otherwise, I was given this topic when Sifagro invited me to speak. It is a heavily loaded title, as you can see. The state of state-owned companies and public entities and related reforms undertaken to achieve alignment and efficiency. And when I looked at this, I thought, where do I even begin? Because of the theme is around ethical leadership and ethical standards. But there's so much of SOEs that you know of, which has happened in the recent past. And I could be taking an angle of risk management, I could be taking an angle of leadership and so forth, and many other angles that one could not consider at the time of receiving the invitation. But nonetheless, I said, how do I frame my thoughts around this? Maybe let me stay within the realm of what we have practically been doing as a department in the last at least 10 years or so I've been there. And why is that the case? Because of, there's a framework that, I learned in the not so distant past. It talks about, I'm sorry, right there. I hope this thing didn't break. Okay, still working fine. It talks about, competence, that first and foremost, you ought to know what you know, which is conscious competence. Also, you sometimes you don't know what you know, and it's unconscious competence, and of course, there's unconscious incompetence, which is you don't know what you don't know, and also conscious incompetence. You know what you don't know, and that is very important, especially because of as I was listening to the last speaker. One of the things that struck a chord in the theme within which I chose to speak was around the role of risk management. That where is it? As risk officers, we talk about internal controls and so forth. And more importantly, he mentioned something in passing, which resonates with us, perhaps maybe at an individual level, which is don't try to be a hero when it comes to matters of corruption and fraud. And for me, that was profound. It made me reflect a bit as a person and say, what does it really mean? And he went on to speak about whistleblowers and so forth. And essentially, it made me think about one of the convictions that I hold as a person, and particularly as a risk officer in government, is that, we can talk about systems of internal control. And perhaps maybe what we may want to pay attention to is, can a system of internal control insulate, the organization from undue influence? The issue is very important for me. And I was often so argued to say that perhaps it may not be able to, because of if you're in the face of power, and if we were to draw from lessons around state capture, and what was revealed by the Commission of Inquiry that was chaired by Justice Zondo, is that powerful people in government were reduced to nothing. And you and I, as a risk officer, as an auditor, as a or chief financial officer, who are we to stand in the face of power? Do we have the courage to stand in the face of power? To stand up against, power in the first place? And maybe, perhaps, what we should focus on is what we know we can do to the best of our ability. What is it that is in our control? And what is within our control is to assist an organization to design a system of internal control that can, at least, even if things go wrong, at least it should be able to reveal how things went wrong in the first place. Because we talk about a system of internal control that should be preventative in nature, that should detect, failure points. But when all those two have bolted, it must be able to correct, because we cannot correct without knowing what went wrong. So yes, I think Jerry, he put it, so nicely to say, just be careful, in terms of what is it that you can do and I cannot do, because of tomorrow, the system swallows you, you're out of a job and whatnot. But then if in your efforts, you mainly focused on, let me build a system that if things go wrong, if people deliberately circumvented controls, this system ought to at least reveal how those, controls were circumvented. And for me, that is the lesson that was also learned around the Zondo Commission. I think I should not fail to mention that we are responsible for 6 state-owned companies. Of those 6, 5 were found to be, they were found to be the subject of state capture. 5 of the 6 entities. And you will see through my presentation as we go on in terms of what it really meant in reality. And I'll present stats as well. I think my colleague at the back there, formerly with me at National Treasury, Lawson, he spoke at length about the system of procurement. And you will see, as I reduce it to some of the numbers that will shock you perhaps, as to what extent can unethical leadership collapse an institution, but more importantly, how can, the damage be in repurposing, the system of procurement for nefarious interests, or at least for private interests. So I think the theme of my speech is around the context of SOEs and why they primarily were designed to deliver as functions of state. And generally, the OECD prescribes, a number of elements on good corporate governance, and generally the shareholder board relationship that exists between a state-owned company and the minister that is responsible as an executive authority, and our oversight model. I think when you look at failure points, we must also understand how the DPE structure itself in the first place, and why is it that certain things happen in a certain way, insofar as successes were concerned, but also insofar as failures are concerned. But also, we cannot fail to reflect on what sets the tone of ethical leadership, particularly around state-owned companies, but also, if that system of internal controls that is meant to drive, behavior that is commensurate with principles of good governance fails, then what reforms, should be put in place. And I'll just talk you through some of the things that we undertook, at least in the last 6 or so, 7 years, since, some of the work that was done by the SIU in particular revealed we need to effect some changes. And I have to say, talking about ethical leadership, maybe before I start zooming into the conversation around what am I here for and what I choose to speak on, is that, at the time, pre the Commission of Inquiry's existence, we were at crossroads at the department. When I say crossroads, in the context that we could have been reduced to nothing in terms of authority that we had. And there were a lot of allegations of corruption that were being reported to the department. And We failed to have systems that were awake to respond to what was being told, on the sidelines and so forth. And I'll talk to, that more when we talk about reforms. But the institution that was supreme at the time, where people sought recourse, was the public protector. And before you think you want to establish a relationship with the public protector to really refer some of the cases, that public protector office was already under siege. It was being attacked. Those who were in government at the time would know that some of the things that we were requested to do was give us evidence of how can we undermine the office of public protector. And in us, reflecting on what was happening at the time, and I'm going to be practical, colleagues, with my presentation. We had to reflect now that the public protector is under siege. Who else? And we know State Capture Commission revealed that some of the value chain of assurance across the state, whether it be at intelligence level, whether it be at criminal investigation level, the value chain was somewhat, to a reasonable extent fixed, and therefore you never had any recourse. But equally so, you say, who else can we reflect, on in terms of their mandate, who could be received well in terms of, dealing with the cases that you're dealing with? And that's why there are 6 proclamations, into 5 proclamations into our SOEs. And at the time, we had to be tactical because of, we had to appreciate that what you're trying to do in addressing the level of corruption that was being reported to the department can be undermined purely because of who are the people involved. If there's some seriously senior executives, politicians and so forth, then what else? And we reflected on almost all institutions, that could assist us. And we found the Special Investigating Unit to be the most viable one at the time. And if you had to go back a bit to history, you'd realize that since the SIU assumed, investigations into the affairs of our SOEs, as particularly Transnet and ESCOM, there was a first proclamation. It was a combined proclamation. It eventually was separated into 2. Their reputation somehow, I want to say that it grew, and there was more interest because of they were revealing a lot of failure points and collusive behavior in our SOEs. So I'm citing this as an example, because of when Jerry spoke and he said, don't try to be a hero. I think he was trying to say, even look within the system and see how can you outfox those who are hell-bent on undermining good governance. And I'll take you through what we did at the time within the context of our state-owned companies. So generally, the context is simple. I think you all know this. And I have to say that, the context of our SOEs is underpinned by 2 chapters. The first chapter is on building a capable state in the NDP. The second chapter is fighting corruption, which is within the context of, my speech here. And I want to, when in preparing this, just as I was seated, I went to ChatGPT. And I asked ChatGPT this question. I asked, when was the development plan of South Africa published, and has the public's perception of corruption in government improved or worsened over time? And there's the answer that I got from ChatGPT. It says, the National Development Plan of South Africa was published in November 2011. Its goal was to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality by 2030 through various economic and social strategies. Regarding the public's perception of government corruption in South Africa, this has generally worsened over the years. Surveys often indicate high levels of concern about corruption, with many South Africans expressing distrust in government institutions. Factors such as high high-profile corruption scandals and political developments have influenced these perceptions. I'll pause here with it because of the answer was quite long. But for me, why I asked this question is because I was listening to the speakers, and you often realize that perhaps all the fundamentals are in place. Perhaps we have to appreciate that we can reform, we can put in prescripts and so forth, but generally behavior starts with an individual. And we have to appreciate that we cannot legislate ourselves into honesty. I mean, honesty, integrity, ethics, all those buzzwords, none of the speakers who stood there from yesterday failed to mention them. But then we still are seeing every day challenges relating to fraud and corruption in particular, and state procurement corruption. Now, while those two chapters, firstly talk about SOEs, being used as paragons of change in transforming the economy of the country, and ensuring that in pursuing those outcomes, they remain, within the realm of good governance. We saw over the many years the challenges, and I don't have to repeat what I've said already. And in our environment, we said, how do we ensure that we align our SOEs with, with the right, way of doing things? We looked at the priorities. These priorities are not new, colleagues. I do know that they are reduced to 3 within the government of national unity, but they've always been there. Inclusive growth and job creation, reduce poverty and tackle the high cost of living, prioritize, priority 3 is build a capable, ethical, and developmental state. That is very important. That is what, the context of this conference is within, because we are trying to build an ethical state. Now, all the SOCs have their respective mandates. They draw their mandates from, their founding legislation, policies of government, and so forth. And what we do as a department, we try to take all these multiple, policies. Some of them have, some of which have tensions that exist between them. We try to streamline them and shape what, for instance, an ESCOM ought to be doing in terms of prioritizing, around economic development and using its resources. So that is just, a high-level lever of we align the SOC's, mandate to the immediate priorities of government, and then they get to be compacted, or there's an agreement, between the minister and the board as to what must be done. But in pursuing a mandate as a state-owned company, there's always a need to maintain ethical culture, sound governance, and the OECD guidelines on corporate governance indicate that first and foremost we must promote the rights, of all the stakeholders in the relationship, and primarily here I'm talking the board and the shareholder. There was what is in company law termed, step-in rights. In this context is that, if a minister has given a board a mandate to achieve a particular goal, and that goal is not being met, then the minister can step in and impose administration, a different form of administration on the state-owned company, take control of, the functions of the board through an administrator, of course, and so forth. But the first problem with this historically was that it was just a clause, an open clause, ended clause in the MOI. It was not setting out what are the conditions that must be in existence for the minister to step in. So, I remember one person in one meeting where we were actively negotiating, the MOI, because of it's a negotiated instrument between the shareholder and the board, because of it defines the relationship, the rules of governance between the shareholder and the minister. executive shareholder and the board. And one of the people said, I come from a municipal environment, and this clause reminds me of something very peculiar that he had to face in his previous environment in the municipal sphere. He says, I was appointed as a municipal manager by a council, and dominated by one particular party, that council. And he said, I was expected to sign a resignation letter and not date it. So meaning that the day council wanted to remove the municipal manager, could simply put a date and say, Clive resigned on the 26th of February as a municipal manager. That is the degree to which how people saw this shareholder step in right. That it means on any given day when a minister feels I can simply remove this board because they are not agreeable to my whims, then that can happen because there was no clear, goals set to determine how and when will the shareholder step in to administer the governance of the board. So those are some of the examples. Notwithstanding that, if you reflect on the OEC guidelines, says a shareholder must have access to information that is crucial to long-term, decision making. Is that significant investments by the board, must be also vetted by the shareholder, as a public representative in the governance of a state-owned company. But also is that, executive remuneration must be congruent with performance. I think one of the things that we found in our environment, and I think it's about within the ethical leadership realm again, is that one of the SOEs that we are dealing with pays highly exorbitant performance bonuses for the state-owned company, to the state-owned company executive. It was in and around May when that happened. When I say highly exorbitant, I think cumulatively with the executives that are there, they got at least plus minus 15 million, and there was no more than 10 executives. Now, 3 months later, when the AG publishes a statement, the entity failed to meet its targets for that year. Not even 50% of the targets were met. Secondly, is that when we listened on the ground, visiting the operations, at least for the past 6 months, the entity could not even purchase, sanitary, items, such as tissue paper in the toilets, or in the restrooms and so forth. But then they were able, because of the SOEC was on its knees, they were able to still to give themselves bonuses of this nature. I think that goes into the heart of ethics. Is it really ethical for us to expect that people should go to the restrooms and not be able to help themselves? They have to drive to a mall, come back 30 minutes later, late for work, be reprimanded, and then we are in the process of paying performance bonuses. I think these are things, because when you think of ethics, you should not think of, illegality. It's about the acceptable thing that a person will do given, a reasonable test. And that's where we are. Now, but also, there's issues relating to, general performance of the state-owned company. We need to reduce the reliance on the fiscals, attract investors, and so forth. And we do know, I don't have to with the SOEs that I've mentioned that we were responsible for, those are the challenges. We need to ensure economic development and transformation within, procurement prescripts that the likes of Lawson spoke about earlier on, sustainable development and so forth. There were programs in the past around industrialization. For instance, I think the last cycle before the $100 billion announced in the SONA was 100, black industrialists must be developed by 2015-16 thereabouts, that was not achieved to a reasonable extent. And today we're talking about further 100 billion being committed to ensure that we transform the economy, certain sectors of the economy, and empower Black people. But again, is how do you do it? I don't think the 100 billion is saying that by all means possible, even when a person is incompetent, they must be handpicked because of a pronouncement was made. But there's a reality of the challenges we're facing that some people in business in particular would expect that. That's where the pressures come through in our systems. And we have to, again, revert to what Jerry spoke about, that do you want to be a hero or do you apply the rule book and let the system take care of the circumstances that are prevailing at the time? I touched a bit on the difficulty of the shareholder relationship. I think summarily on this slide, what I can say is that the shareholder is generally responsible for the appointment of board members and removal of board members, and also is involved, must concur with the appointment of a CEO and a CFO in a state-owned company. Again, here there was a problem with appointment processes. I think Justice Zondo's commission revealed a lot more than I can talk about around the fact that the process is not transparent. People are put in those positions. They are remunerated well. SOCs are failing. FSC financial, position is collapsing, and the people are being retained. I think one of the questions that was asked at the very commission was, has there ever been a board that was fired, and publicly so fired for non-performance? And I think we know the answer to that. So we have all these, codes that prescribe how things must be regulated between the board and the shareholder and so forth. But again, going back to, can you insulate a system of internal control from undue influence? We have seen situations where a certain CEO is recommended, a certain individual is recommended for a CEO position, certain principals will say, no, we don't want this one, we want that one. Notwithstanding that the recommended candidate is the best candidate for the job. And that is the heart of what the commission was talking about. And again, when you talk ethical leadership, do we say we're looking at the administrative arm only of the state, which is the CEs and so forth, or the political element as well? And I think when I talk about can a system of internal control insulate an organization from undue influence, maybe it's more the political element. Can we really stand up to politicians that come in and try to impose certain decisions on the executive? I think a lot of you will have a lot of case studies around that and so forth. So the board is responsible for general performance and strategic direction, and must ensure that everything is done consistent with the policies of the organization insofar as, performance, contracting, procurement are concerned. But they do so within a framework where it starts at a strategic intent statement. We contract the board. There's a corporate plan that's 3-year-old, then we monitor the performance, and we go to AGMs and so forth. There's a general oversight of SOEs, and that's how we regulate our relationship with them, ensuring that SOEs are not micromanaged, because of one of the most important things that you don't want to be, seen to be an active shareholder when the prescripts are there are clearly indicating that, the board must give in the space and the autonomy to do its job. So some of the things that, or rather one of the, the terms that was thrown about at some point in time was certain ministers are basically they come across executive ministers in that they want to be involved in the day-to-day decision-making in SOEs. And this framework or this model of oversight is meant to ensure that the board is given the space and time, and at the appropriate intervals, the shareholder is informed of what happens in the SOE, why can they intervene, and so forth. But we'll see as we go whether this thing was effective or not. So I spoke about oversight, in terms of the functions, the department, like there's operations analysts, there are engineers, for instance, that will oversee ESCOM and the challenges around load shedding. You must have the answers, financial performance, the, legal governance risk, which is around the theme of the conference. And we have other policies that we must look into, transformation imperative that we know here we have to redress the wrongs of the past, through state-owned procurement, including other opportunities such as employment that exist within the SOEs. Those are the things that the department, would oversee regularly. And and in doing so, between the relationship between the minister and the board is that the board has to be honest in their judgment on issues concerning the SOE. Whether you read the Companies Act, or the PFMA, they say the same thing. What is of paramount importance is for the board to stand for what is right, first for the company and all stakeholders, not just the shareholder. But the history has taught us that, some of the people applied the due care and skill to repurpose and illegally divert, resources through procurement systems of state-owned companies. Now, and that's notwithstanding the fact that we had the Companies Act prescribing clearly that there must be a social and ethics committee, and it's very profound around what the social and ethics committee should do. One of the pillars there says the ethics and social committee must ensure the state-owned company has and maintains an effective anti-corruption and fraud prevention system. That's also in the PFMA, by the way. But the nature of what you saw in the last years, is something else. King 4 also equally talks about, fostering accountability on ethics. The people must be taught, what really ethics means. There must be conversations in the organization. There must be ethics risk assessment that we do as risk officers. Auditors, come to audit whether our plans effective or not. If not, why not? And grow to raise further awareness on the things that must be reformed. But the question is, when all is said and done, with all these fundamentals in place, why is it that still we have so many failures in the environment of SOEs? I think that's what we need to really understand. And I recall one of the political principals, in a particular environment, asking colleagues, where were you when state capture happened? Why didn't you do anything? And again, you can be courageous in the face of power and say, but then there were votes of no confidence against certain political heads in parliament and so forth. You voted that way and that way. But the answer, a smart answer that one of the colleagues gave was, but then say the things that were happening in the dark. I think that's one thing we fail to appreciate as well. We talk about where was the system of internal control? Where was the fraud prevention plan? Where was this? Where was the whistleblowing mechanisms and so forth? But if it's not for the whistleblower coming forward and disclosing that I was in a room where X and Z was happening, there's a plan to illegally divert resources of the institution or to fix a procurement plan, we end up not knowing. And I think what is profound is that we end up feeling like we are incompetent. We end up feeling stupid, for a lack of a better way, than that. How did these things happen under our watch? How did these things happen under our own watch when I'm there as an auditor, I'm there as a CFO? Actually, I was in the room when the adjudication happened. But if things were fixed before they enter the system, what else can you do? Nothing in most cases. Unless if someone knew something, then they disclose. And that's how rather, even the Zondo Commission came into being, that there was a whistleblower and so forth, notwithstanding some of the investigations that were done by the public protector. So when your eyes, the wool has been pulled over your eyes, or your eyes have been peeled, you see the big elephant in the room. That the system of internal control that I'm maintaining and I'm implementing is not as effective as I thought it is, because it cannot pick up on things that are happening in the dark. And quickly within our environment, we realize that if you want to be trapped within pathology of perfectionism, which is we want a perfect tool or perfect internal control that's going to be perfect to address corruption, we will never be able to overcome the challenge that we're facing at the time. And while investigations were happening, in real time, when things were being picked up, we'll go to the SOEs. We'll indicate to them that this is what we picked up through the investigations, while you are still applying yourself on the findings and the recommendations thereof. There's clearly gaps in the internal control system, policies and procedures and so forth, that must be reformed for you to at least avert the situation of the nature of the things that were found by the investigation. And I'm not talking consequence management, because it's another matter. But we talk about the business processes. While the investigation is unfolding in real time, we'll have governance meetings with the likes of the SIU and so forth to say, can we let things be until we finalize the investigations? The big answer was no. Let's focus on ethical sustainability, that we cannot allow things to continue happening the way they happen. Otherwise, we won't have certain companies left to manage. So, where are we? Having learned that and trying to eat the elephant bit by bit, we first started off, I spoke about the mandate of SOEs. I don't think any of us, including myself, when we went to school, we said, no, I want to deal with corruption. And I think dealing with ethics issues and corruption are a microcosm of a bigger performance, system. And we went back, we reflected on what are the fundamentals that were missing in the system of risk management in these organizations. And among the things that were not clear to us was there's no standardized way of reporting to the shareholder matters of risk and performance management, which meant that each organization was doing its own reporting based on its own ERM plan. But then, the system of risk management at shareholder level is not concerned with the ERM processes of an institution. It should be concerned rather with what are the activities that, what are the SOE activities that can expose us, government at large, through to threats that can undermine the desire to achieve the economic development objectives of the country. And that's why we started with our reforms, that risk management and performance management must be integrated. That's the first thing. The second thing was that when the corporate plan came in, there appeared to be a punctuation in terms of focusing on the first year of the corporate plan. The corporate plan is a 3-year plan that must ensure that the SOE, outlines what actions is it going to take to meet objectives, what are the targets, and so forth. Now we'll appreciate that. What could be assumptions in the first year of your plan, and what could be risks in the first year of your plan, and if they are managed, the exposure surely should be changing over time in the outer years. I found that it was just a punctuation of here's a corporate plan, here's a first year of performance, this is what we expect to meet, and then you go to the next year, we just told this is what the number is going to be on financial performance, EBITDA, net profit, and so forth. And there was no risk plan or evolution of assumptions that were made to say, actually, how will the picture look in second year and third year on the risks that we identified? And that's why we took a step back. We said, look, this goes to the heart of, sustainability of SOEs. In that, in your planning, you ought to be able to tell us where things will be in 3 years' time. If not, why not? And I say this because of the nature of information that was being submitted to us lacked integrity. Because you'll be told in June, which is end of quarter one in terms of performance cycle in government, the PFMA or wise, you'll be told we are on track, we are achieving all the targets, EBITDA margins, and come the third quarter of the year, which is January, February, when we receive the report, it's chalk and cheese. You take that report you received in June, you take the one in January, there's a complete disconnect between the two. And then there was a significant problem for us, because we wondered, but then why are we being told these things? And again, it talks to the issue of having the right information at the right time. Now, if the corporate planning is not robustly engaged, then you could expect that these things perhaps that ought to have been picked up through a system of risk management were not picked up. Or if anything, if there were risks that emerged, why were they not reported to the department? But equally, while I mentioned that boards must be remunerated consistent with the performance of the organization, including executives and so forth, what was missing in our system was, when does a minister make a case for a board in terms of performance? When we only looked at the assumptions at a particular interval, but then also because you have a shareholder compact. Remember, a shareholder compact is a performance agreement between the minister and the board. Now, if you have a performance contract between minister and the board, surely there's specific initiatives that must be assumed by minister, such as you may have policy-oriented challenges. You may have a policy issue around environmental sustainability, but at the same time, we have load shedding, that also is a problem. And they say, but then let's ramp up, rehabilitation of your power generation fleet, coal-fired power generation fleet. So now there's a tension there that in one environmental affairs department will say we want this, the air quality must be maintained up to this level, but at the same time, we want energy to be produced and to be available for everyone in the country. So those are the tensions that we saw. I'm just citing this as an example to say, in mitigating the risks that SOCs were facing, the loop that was not being closed was the loop where the shareholder has a specific responsibility to play, so that tomorrow you can say, but shareholder, you ought to have intervened in this matter for us, you failed. So our shareholder compact now, every target is linked to a risk. Every risk has got a specific role player that must drive the mitigation thereof. And I'm talking micro and macroeconomic, issues relating to risk management here. So that's where we are. And in the main, we want to ensure that there's a reduction in reliance on the fiscus and so forth. On matters of a conflict of interest, one of the things that permeated almost all institutions in our portfolio was that there were board tender committees. And the PFMA is clear, the Companies Act is clear, procurement prescriptions generally in the state are clear that the board should not be involved in procurement, but there were board tender committees that wanted to know who was appointed for what, and basically who's winning the tender. Are they competent? Another factor that was being punted by the CFOs in particular was that there's a who knows who factor. That element of conflict of interest, that you are told, someone whispers, you are in a bid education meeting as a CFO, you are told, hey, just look out for this company here. I know the people. And that's why we had to revise the memorandum of incorporation of all SOEs, of each SOE rather. Revise this to exclude board tender committees because they were problematic. Essentially, they were instruments that, were utilized or exploited to repurpose procurement in SOEs. And as far as people will be concerned, is that the CFO didn't do their job. But then if a board tender committee is there, then it says, CFO, we are not happy, 1, 2, 3, go back. So you go back until they are satisfied that you appointed the people that they wanted you to appoint. Assurance value chain was also fixed, colleagues. I think we again, the Zondo Commission revealed that auditors were immersed in not pursuing certain activities that were found to be irregular over time. Financial disclosures were non-existent. I think those of us who work in government, not those state-owned companies, will appreciate one thing, that our probity is always in check. It's always in check. I think we are among the most transparent people with our personal issues, whether it's a loan that you have, a house, and now in other organizations in the state, particularly in state-owned companies, we didn't have these things. So it begs the question: if not, why not? If not, why not? And again, it goes back to that element of lifestyle audits. And as soon as you disclose, then other things are being revealed. Contractor probity checks were not extended to subcontractors, meaning that you could appoint me as Clive, and my subsidiary company could be a subcontractor. You're not even seeing that because of you only limiting the contracting probity check to the main contractor, not the subcontractor. And that's where a lot of money is being siphoned out of SOEs by the same parties, by the way. So then probity checks extended to subcontractors, but also that business partners in far as significant contracts are concerned were now also to be extended to politically exposed people as per the OECD guidelines, employees of entities that employees of state-owned companies were prohibited from doing business with their respective employer. There was pre the Procurement Act that Lawson spoke about. These are the reforms that we introduced then. All right, donations were another area that was being abused. That we sit in a committee, disposal committee. Meanwhile, I know that NPO, I'm punting for it. I get it. I get to what is it? I get to promote that certain assets of the state be disposed to them, and I get something in return. But the worst is that there are board members who are getting donations. Their companies were getting donations from state-owned companies. Direct conflict of interest, right? So those are things that we introduced, prohibitions and so forth. And employment, I think there's an issue of throwing the javelin. And I think, again, talking ethics, not necessarily illegality, is that everyone has a right to their trade of choice. I think it's enshrined in the Bill of Rights. But it's one thing for you to be seeking employment, is another to be adjudicating on a major contract and its award to company X. And then 3 months, you're a senior executive, 3 months later, you resign, you join that very company. Surely, if you don't reflect on that, then why do we still have, some of the measures that we have? So these are the things that, our system picked up. People were also free to do work as and when they did work. They didn't need to be, I'm talking about what is called remunerated work outside of, or the equivalent of remunerated work outside of private practice here. In the SOE environment, people will you'll hear that someone left the office at 11 because he's going to lecture in the afternoon at 3. That's the nature. And when you see all these failures, colleagues, we ask ourselves why, but then those are the things that we picked up. On vetting integrity assessments, I think, and integrity management in particular, is that I think my colleagues spoke about whistleblowers. The whistleblowers were poorly protected. Secondly, is that whistleblowers, didn't have a recourse. So in the event that there was conflict of interest within the system of SOEs, they didn't know where else to go. So we introduced a hotline that assisted them to deal with the realities on the ground so that they can reasonably feel that they will remain anonymous in terms of the reports they disclose. And generally, there was a backlog on whistleblower reports in terms of assessment. One of the things that we did was, one of the reforms, and it's a KPI in the boards, across the boards of our SOEs, is that there's a lead time within which you must evaluate or conduct an assessment into a whistleblower report. There's a lead time in terms of if the whistleblower report does confirm that indeed there should be a full scope investigation, then we're saying within 60 days you must appoint a firm, if you're appointing a firm externally, to do the investigation. Because otherwise we'll be playing lip service to that element of consequence management. And again, should it be that within the report, full forensic report, discloses that there was wrongdoing and then people must be held accountable, then we have a lead time of 60 days to say within 60 days, a matter must be tabled with the prescribing officer. Why did we have to do this, colleagues? It's because, again, we can talk ethics, we can all talk these things, but, there's one report where someone could have easily been summarily dismissed. It's set for over 5 years. Nothing was done with that report. And the person assumed much more senior positions in the system. And when you ask the question, why is it that the whistleblower report is saying that there's a report on Clive, and Clive should have been dismissed? The recommendation was that Clive, was found his hand in the cookie jar, he must be dismissed. You're told, no, we are still applying ourselves on the report. That forensic report, we applied ourselves. Basically, a legal firm was appointed to apply itself to assist, the organization interpret what has been said. But then 5 years later, nothing was done. So those are the things that we're talking about, when you say we introduced reforms, including the fact that, there was, in these systems, there was issues around the fact that your forensic units, were not independent, were reporting directly to operating division managers and so forth. And then, in the policies, it said you cannot bypass. If you're investigating anything, first you must tell the operating division manager, generally a CEO in a particular environment. And if you so do bypass them, then it creates problem for you. You could be disciplined. This is what you forensic auditors and other equivalent officials in this SOEs were faced with. And we said, no way. No way. These things, structures must be reviewed, policies must be reviewed, there must be financial disclosures, there must be security clearances, probity checks on people. Some people entered the systems of SOEs 30 years ago. They are sitting in the same positions. You don't know whether they have got a criminal record against them or whatever, and so forth, but they are entrusted with serious, sensitive positions in their environments. These are things that we looked into, and we said, surely reforms must be introduced, and so forth. So I spoke about the fact that the boards are being compacted on these things. When I say compacted, they're being contracted to deliver on this. And lastly, is that the National Estate Enterprises Bill, I think we all know of it. The last public comments date was the 14th of Valentine's Day, the 14th of February. And it's ushering reforms. It's trying to usher reforms in terms of transparency around how do you appoint people, including general listing of state-owned companies and so forth on the stock exchange, and the conditions that must be present for and be followed to exercise such a process. So that's why we are colleagues. And I think all of us, we know that at some point in time, we are at crossroads. We as a department are at crossroads. I told you already that we're no longer going to be existing. We're going to other policy departments. But we chose a course to pursue at that particular point based on the data that was available to us. Because you can only rely on the data that is available to you. So if information doesn't come to you, it means that either you're not doing well in your role, or secondly, you are not trustworthy of people coming to you disclosing certain things to you. So we chose a course based on the data that was available at the time. And I think as we leave here, There's this quotation that I wish to leave with you by Dr. Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist in Canada. And he says that there are many things to which we might commit ourselves. A case can be made for the arbitrary and even meaningless nature of any given commitment, given the plethora of alternatives, given the corruption of systems demanding that commitment. However, when you face a challenge, you grapple with the world and inform yourself. This makes you more than you are. It makes you increasingly into who you could be. But the same cannot be made for the fact of commitment itself. Those who do not choose a direction are lost. It is far better to become something than to remain anything but become nothing. This is despite all the genuine limitations and disappointments that becoming something entails. So I spoke about conscious commitment, unconscious commitment, conscious competence, unconscious competence, and the conscious incompetence and unconscious incompetence. And I think this summarizes nicely. For as long as we know what we know, we should be able to do something, but then with the reality check that there's limitations to the systems that we can develop as individuals, and we can only first shape our behaviors. So I hope that while I've said what I've said, you get a sense of the challenges that we face as a department and some of the changes we attempted to effect. Some are bearing fruits. You know, the SIU in closing, just to give you a roundabout stats, is that the SIU picked up that 14.7 billion worth of contracts were imbued with corruption in our SOEs. 2 billion was successfully been recovered. You know, 11.3 billion of contracts were set aside, you know, in terms of, the courts. They were declared unlawful contracts imbued with corruption. And savings of, 10.1 billion, on co-supply contracts were registered purely because of the SIU process intervened, and there's more claims, against some of the service providers. 8.3 billion still, work is still unfolding, to target other people. You'll see more. I think Advocate Mutivi and the team there are doing a wonderful work in terms of what the DPE triggered as a process to foster accountability. And from our side as well, post the Zondo Commission report, we have more than 94 individual directors being referred to the CIPC for delinquency proceedings. Secondly is that we have about 54 former directors, in these SOEs. They have been referred to professional bodies to be disciplined for their conduct in relation to state capture and other forms of corruption that were picked up by the various authorities that investigated the affairs of state-owned companies. So there's a little that we are doing, and there's a little we're going to be taking into the new environments where some of you may be our colleagues, depending on where you come from. But having said that, I would say, Madam Chair, I'll pause here, and I thank you colleagues for listening, and hopefully we share something as DPE that resonates with your environment, but also assist in terms of how can you better reform your environments as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll take some questions if there's any in the audience. One in the front here and front there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hey, over the years, I've lost confidence on SOEs for some obvious reasons. But maybe, firstly, I would like to thank the presenter for the very informative insight on this topic. But maybe I would like to check if maybe the presenter can share any highlights of successful reforms that have significantly improved the performance of SOEs or public entities of our country. Maybe secondly, what are the long-term strategies that are being planned to ensure that SOE remains viable and competitive in the global economy? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Once more from Northern Cape Provincial Treasury. I'm responsible for supporting the 3 Cs in the province, 3 C public entities. Recently, we had induction program that we arranged as a province, as Treasury. They were supposed to assist our 3 Cs, the newly formed 3 C. So the question that I'm having is that, do you have perhaps a program that you have to induct or to onboard newly appointed board members? Or do you expect them to just hit the ground running? Because some of them, most of them, or should I say, they are involved with a lot of boards, but now the newly ones, the newly elected ones, do you have a structured or onboarding program for them?
All right.
Good morning, colleagues. You mentioned that performance management is actually integrated with risk management. Can you unpack in practical terms, what does that look like?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. No, thanks. Thanks for that, colleagues, for those questions. They prompt further questions, by the way, in terms of to what extent, I think maybe to start with you, based on what you said, to what extent have you really been telling a good story in the SOE environment? I think that is what is lacking, and that's the message I'm going to be taking home with me around the SOEs that are in our portfolio. But to be direct, to your question, is that as a start, I spoke about what have been the successes, emanating from reforms introduced. And I want to stay within the realm of this conference. And I spoke about board tender committees. One of the things that we did away immediately was having board tender committees that were immersed in decisions relating to procurement. And ever since that was introduced, we have never had any allegations of corruption against the sitting board member. Still, the ones that still come through now are relative. They predate the current board members and they predate the reforms that we introduced. And I think we need to take that to heart, because of what it means is that we have ethical leaders currently. Because of surely, at the rate things were being reported to us, the trajectory appears to be declining. Then it means something good is happening in these SOEs. The leadership first sets the tone, and they are exemplary in how they conduct themselves, and they give the SOEs the space to do what they need to do. But secondly is micromanagement of the boards. I think I spoke earlier on that, the stepping rise, and I want to dwell on the legalities thereof. But it simply means, within this realm, talking about to what extent is the minister actively involved in the decision-making concerning critical affairs of the SOE. And the boards have been given the space to do what they have been appointed to do. And I know it may sound and seem awkward and funny, but then the current board of ESCOM and the CEOs and the new generation manager, in the last year, they have been able to keep load shedding at bay. There's an example of what it means to give people a space to do and apply the competency consistent with the priorities of the institution. Notwithstanding that we know that the fundamentals of generation capacity in that institution still require a lot more to be done. All right. But they have won awards, by the way. It's not I'm talking about the chairperson of ESCOM and the CEO of Generation in ESCOM. They have won awards. Those are success stories. That if your appointment process is credible, and I think the NDP speaks about that, by the way. Chapter 13 speaks about credible appointment of competent, leadership in the SOEs. There's one of the many examples, where you talk about integrity of the appointments, that they can demonstrate to a reasonable extent that even private sector stands up and votes for these people to say, you indeed are capable leaders. On the global scale, look, I would say, while we seem to be pessimistic about the environment, at least in the position I occupied for many years, we tend to do well in the context of, the instruments that we have. When I say instruments, I'm talking about, the prescripts that I mentioned in my presentation relating to, for instance, ethical conduct. Other countries don't have those things, but other countries don't have what the experiences and the lessons, such as the rich lessons, by the way, that they have learned out of state capture. And it was the vibrancy of the system of accountability that could only foster a Chief Justice sitting in a commission and people feeling protected to go there and disclose what they knew about state-owned companies. How many, countries have had such? I haven't, a commission of inquiry into corruption in the state. I'm not talking about one institution, across the state. That's a first. So if you're talking about Transparency International, anti-bribery issues, we tick all the boxes. I think it goes back to, it starts from within. As a leader, are you willing to stand ground in the face of power and say this is wrong? But again, seeing equally is that even when things go wrong, the systems that we have are able to tell exactly how things went wrong and what must we correct. And I think that must be one of the takeaways, around internal control system that we can pick up. On inductions, we do have inductions. The boards are inducted on, we don't assume that they know. They're inducted first on their founding legislation, The ESCOM Convention Act is what establishes ESCOM, for instance. And therefore, they need to know what this thing means. We induct them on the PFMA, the Companies Act, the King, notwithstanding that some are certified directors. So we mandate them on the policies of government, the priorities, the National Development Plan, we also induct them on the strategic intent statement, that I spoke about. That is where we pull all these policies into one document, the one document that says you must be primed to foster job creation, ethical leadership, optimum performance, and so forth. We induct on all those things. And I have to say that we have looked at the number of directorships a person holds. Some are really holding a lot. And we are consulting with the likes of Treasury, the Institute of Directors and so forth to say, how do we mitigate against that? Because surely some of them, by the way, are sitting CEOs of other companies, but you'll find that the person is a director, a chief director in more than 20, So, but at least I think in our case right now, we have managed to a degree reduce that to a reasonable extent. Except that there's other leaders who are just at the center of almost everything that moves in the economy. And not having them on your board means you're missing out on key insights that we could present. So it's a double-edged sword as well. That certain ones you just have to move your levers a little and say, we have to accept it for what it is. In terms of integration between risk and performance, simple. Spoke about the mandate. Said that every institution, so we have those outcomes. The three, priorities of the current government for inclusive growth, developmental state and job creation and the like, reducing poverty. So the performance agreement between the minister and the shareholder, the minister and the board rather, the shareholder is the minister, the board and the shareholder. First, it looks at the outcomes, and we're saying what is the capability of the institution vis-a-vis this outcome. And immediately we set a target based on that. It's quite a rigorous process that is undertaken, colleagues. I think it takes about 6 to 7 months to just negotiate the shareholder compact, and there's always a pushback because of the realities on the ground. So we have the outcome, we have a target. Then you will say, what are the key drivers of performance, or what are the key drivers of risk, of failures in our system? And then what are the fundamentals in place? I won't want to say use terms like internal controls. So what is the capability within the organization? Because we're talking a relationship between the shareholder and the board. What are the fundamentals that are in place to drive this? Because of why they're important is that when these fundamentals, when you're not meeting the performance, you must reflect on the fundamentals, which are root cause analysis. Then we say, what must be done by whom? So in our shareholder compact process, then we have the role of the minister. It must be clear. This target, if you're saying, maybe for instance, to practical example, if you're saying the outcome is that we want to ensure optimum energy security in the country, and then the target is that energy availability factor must be at 60%. In the last year, there was a target, if you recall. It means we will look at what are the risks that are involved in that, and then what are the fundamentals in place, that must drive that performance. Lastly, you'll say, minister, remember the example I gave earlier, I want to say, if you say you want energy availability factor to be at 60%, but then Department of Environmental Affairs is saying you shall not produce energy through dirty, coal, must be on renewables. And the renewables are not coming to the grid as quickly as to drive that 60%. It's the role of the minister to unlock policy tensions. Because of you put it there. It must be clear that in the event you don't meet the 60%, you as minister had a specific role to play. And the board, our role was to refurbish the power stations and ensure that they are operating at the level required to drive 60%. And that's when now we can make a case for the board or against the board. So these things are interconnected because they also go with board evaluation, and they also go with the board fees that these individuals are paid. So it's an accountability framework. It's not just seen as a risk process only. It's a matter of we have said these things. These are the fundamentals in place. If the minister did everything that he needed to do, then the question sits with the board. Why did you not achieve the targets? Now, if through the risk process we didn't pick this thing up, the question is why not? Because of now, when the corporate plan comes for the next year or the next 3 years, a rolling plan, we must be clear about what are the failures that triggered the non-achievement of 60% and what must be corrected through the corporate plan. And when we do that, we say these targets must be in the shareholder compact must be expressed in the corporate plan. Otherwise, it's hot air to say we're going to achieve 60% and it's a contract between the minister and the board, but it's not expressed in the corporate plan. I think for those who are new to government, the corporate plan means there's a business plan of the state-owned company. So that's where we are, colleagues. But more than welcome to take further questions offline. I know that others may not feel to keep others too long in these conversations. I'm available, colleagues. All right, thanks.